Hello and welcome to another episode of 5 Frames From. Today I'm looking at the music video 17 Going Under by Sam Fender, and it's another set text for the A-level Eduqas Media Studies paper. So we're going to start off with just a little background information, some context, and then we'll look at the 5 frames from the music video that I've chosen. So in recent times we're hearing a lot about artists working during the pandemic and during lockdown, and this is an example of an album that was written during that time when people weren't allowed to go out or socialise, and as such we might argue that this album is particularly sort of introspective. It's examining the life of Sam Fender, and in particular obviously with this song 17 Going Under is all about Sam as a 17-year-old and the emotions that he's feeling. On his website, Sam writes a letter to his 17-year-old self, and in it you can see some of the things that he's concerned about at the time. The song 17 Going Under reached number 3 in the UK singles charts and has won various awards. One of the reasons it's so popular is because when it was released on TikTok, it went viral, largely because audience members were responding to what was in the song. So there's something about the song that really rings true for the audience. Audience members started talking about things that they'd overcome, domestic violence, bad relationships, things like that. But they also changed the lyrics of the song and recorded themselves singing the particular line, I was far too scared to hit him, but I would hit him in a heartbeat now. So fans kind of changed some of the words on that and made the song their own. Sam Fender has been called the North Shields Springsteen. Now this refers to where Sam Fender comes from, North Shields, in the north of the UK. And the American artist Bruce Springsteen, often referred to as the Boss. Springsteen was known for writing stories about his hometown and growing up in New Jersey. So we can see the connections there. They both sing with a sort of gritty edge to their voices and to their lyrics. The first frame that I've chosen is this extreme long shot of Sam Fender standing in the middle of the street. We can see it's a lovely symmetrical frame, really nicely balanced. Sam in the middle, in the distance at the moment, but the camera is going to track forward and we're going to see more of him. Perhaps this is telling us a little bit about how Sam as a 17-year-old is influenced by the people around him, by the streets that he lives in, the place that he comes from. And equally, we're given a sense of where this is. It's a very sort of working class location. This is something stereotypically that we see over and over again and signifies this idea of the working classes, everyone sort of packed in together. Usually when we see this kind of location, it's got a historical feel to it, children playing in the streets, mums and dads outside, that sort of thing. But here we've got this quiet, empty street, no one else around, which gives this lovely performance space for Sam Fender to appear in. Perhaps this slightly old-fashioned, slightly dated street, this working class street, is there to contrast with some of the later locations. The beach is kind of open and more free, whereas here perhaps the street feels a bit more claustrophobic and like eyes are watching. Equally, we see other working class locations such as the high-rise buildings in the background of some of the shots. So we're seeing different parts of North Shields, and again that idea that where he's grown up has influenced the person that he is. So North Shields must have been quite difficult to grow up in. We're told in headlines that it's got one of the highest levels of child poverty in the UK, so lots of families struggling economically. Thriving economies within the fishing industry and shipbuilding industry aren't as strong as they used to be. And if you read some newspaper articles featuring the voices of locals, they sometimes talk about drug problems in the area. And of course, Sam Fender himself refers to shifting gear at one point. So families have found themselves struggling. Sam Fender himself doesn't originally come from a working class background. He was kind of fairly comfortably off to start off with. His family found themselves struggling a bit more when his mum and dad split up. And he does talk about his mum being in debt in the song. The performance of the song gets more intense as we continue, with the camera getting closer to Sam Fender. We start to see mid shots and medium close-up shots, so we're able to pay more attention to his facial expressions and his costume. His facial expression in particular really shows the emotion in the performance. He really feels a lot of the lyrics, and by the end of the song he looks kind of spent in his performance. He's put so much energy into it and anger into it. So we really get a sense of how he feels as a 17-year-old boy. All of this helps to create a slightly more realistic look to the video, a bit more realism to the video, which perhaps contrasts with some of the other scenes. So for example, some of the scenes on the beach, for example, don't feel as realistic. And also later on, Sam is kind of raised up over the street and is almost floating above the rooftop. So again, that removes us from this kind of realistic portrayal. So I just want to say something about his costume here, and I've done quite a lot of research about Sam Fender and his outfit. He's done quite a lot of modelling, however, none of that relates to this video. So for me, this costume looks like the sort of thing that I used to see when I went with my dad to the working man's club when I was a lot younger. It reminds me of sort of dart players and kind of working men's sports and things like that. I suppose the thing that this shirt and trouser combo really reminds me of is sort of workwear. And if you look at the Eduqas brand, which is an American brand that's been around for more than 100 years, it's a company that produced shirts, jeans, dungarees for kind of mechanics and blue collar workers. And the idea is that it looks sort of fairly smart, but also it was practical and hard wearing. So I think again, we've got that link to the working classes through his costume and the things it's reminiscent of. It's very hard to see the actual shirt in a lot of detail, but there seems to be some sort of car motif on there as well. So that links to that idea of kind of workwear in the garage. So again, it's all about creating this working class image, growing up in this working class area and experiencing the sort of difficulties of having less money around and, you know, struggling to make ends meet. So the second shot that I've chosen is this rear view long shot of a mother holding her child. And although at this point we can't see her face, when the camera moves we are able to tell that she's a teenage mother. And although I think largely the video avoids representations that are stereotypical to do with gender, I think this one is a stereotype of the teenage mum. We get a sense that it's women that do the childcare, it's women that look after the children, and obviously that's a very stereotypical representation. Now, although we can't see her face, there is a sense of kind of looking wistfully out to sea and the things that the sea represents. I've said in other videos that perhaps the sea represents freedom, but here it could equally be creating that sort of claustrophobia in terms of it being a barrier to her getting to where she wants to be. Perhaps the sea here represents a sort of nostalgic view of North Shields because the sea would once have been an area of prosperity. It would have been an industry that was thriving, and now it's not so much. It also presents perhaps different sides of North Shields as well. So here we've got a sense of the beauty of North Shields, and of course that's juxtaposed with some of the more kind of claustrophobic shots and the sort of harsher reality of being a teenager. This shot is also one of the first times that we see the lyrics and the visuals linked together, something that Andrew Goodwin talks about. Fender talks about fist fights on the beach, and although we see that literally happening later on, here we have got the beach established as a key location. So for my third frame, I've chosen this mid-shot of Sam Fender travelling around in the car, and the reason I've chosen this is because it links with the lyric I mentioned earlier. I was far too scared to hit him, but I'd hit him in a heartbeat now. It's not a lyric that links with the visuals, particularly here, although we do see fighting a bit later in the video. But here, Sam Fender, with this low-key lighting, staring out the window, looks quite pensive, quite thoughtful, reflecting on the past. Perhaps the use of the car signifies kind of a journey, growing up, self-discovery. I think it's more likely that it represents the sort of stereotype of the teenage boy driving around too fast in cars, down country lanes, kind of looking for trouble. It reflects that idea that there's not a lot for teenagers to do in the evening, apart from going out, getting drunk and causing trouble. You know, it's that stereotype that is often true in a lot of places where there isn't a lot of money. There's not a lot of services available for young people. Going back to the lyrics, this is not a place where Sam Fender uses any local sort of dialect words, although we do hear some of those later on in the song. But he does use sort of colloquial language when he's referring to kicking Tom's head in. The language that Sam Fender uses in the song is understandable and the language of teenagers, it's something that the audience can relate to. We can also hear Sam Fender's accent throughout the song, and it's something that makes him unique as an artist. We can hear that kind of Geordie tone, and as I said, he uses some local idioms as well. This perhaps shows his pride in where he has grown up, and again his pride in his background. He's very vocal about the sort of north-south divide. The fourth frame that I have chosen is this one that also makes use of low-key lighting. It's got a slightly high angle, focusing on a table covered in the debris of family life, but in particular bills, a lighter, a bottle that we assume is a bottle of alcohol. In the background we can see a person, but we don't see their face, we don't see their reaction, so the emphasis is definitely put on all of this kind of paraphernalia on the table. And again, it links to the lyrics in terms of the debt that Sam Fender's mum is in, the overwhelming nature of the kind of paperwork that she's being sent, the demands she's being sent, and the sort of desperation that comes with living like that. We could argue that the low-key lighting creates a sense of drama. It heightens the drama and the tension within the narrative, and this is a pivotal point in the narrative because it really gives a sense of Sam Fender's motivation. But also we could argue that the low-key lighting is partly to do with kind of living with very little money and not being able to afford to have the lights on, which is a very real issue that people have today. I think that when Sam Fender is singing about his family, for example here, when he's talking about his mum being just a DWP number, or when he's talking about his father and looking like his dad, his performance becomes even more emotional, even more powerful in his delivery. And I said before, he looks spent at the end of the video. So these lyrics come towards the end of the song, and so we're really building up in performance, and as I said before, building up in sort of tension and drama. So in terms of location, we've moved from exterior to interior, and the tight framing and the exclusion of parts of the body in the shot makes it feel even more oppressive and even more claustrophobic. And there is a sense of not being able to escape from these bills, from this alcohol, from these different things that people use to cope, that potentially just make the situation worse. This shot is in complete binary opposition to some of those more open shots like the beach, where, you know, we've got this sunny, beautiful location, even if violent things sometimes are happening on the beach. This is perhaps the most personal of the locations, and there is a frame when we see Sam Fender stood in the back of the shot. With the use of the framing and camera angle in the home environment, it feels kind of chaotic and desperate and difficult to get out of. So again, it's that sense of building to a climax. So my final frame is actually 2 frames, but they're just examples of something I mentioned earlier. I said that I felt that the video largely avoided stereotypical representations, and I think here's a couple of examples. So we've got the women fighting on the beach, restrained by the male characters. The male characters are hanging around in a group and finding community and collaboration, whilst the girls are much more kind of aggressive. We see an extreme close-up of bloodied knuckles, for example, and they belong to one of the females. So this goes against stereotype. You know, men are generally represented as aggressive and powerful, but here we've got that representation with our 2 female characters. The representation of masculinity is also subverted in the lyrics, and Sam Fender makes reference to playing the lad, hiding his emotions with jokes, you know, that pressure to appear to be a particular type of person. So we could argue that he is raising questions about toxic masculinity. I've also chosen this shot of a same-sex couple, just in terms of sort of costume, hair, makeup, props. The character that we can see in the foreground of the frame is presented as quite alternative in her style, so there's that sense of young people being creative and exciting and vibrant, and we've got that reflected in some of the club scenes as well, where lots of colourful lighting is used. In terms of it being a same-sex couple, it suggests that young people are much more accepting of relationships that are outside of the sort of traditional norm. So we've not just got negative representations in the video, we've got some representations that subvert stereotypes, and representations that create questions and get us thinking about things like gender and age and place. So I think that's a good place to end, with you kind of going away thinking about what frames might suggest alternative representations. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.